Cool, same. Love it. I'll probably give it another minute or so, but in the spirit of being punctual and hopefully efficient, we'll try and get started and have a hard stop in an hour.
Hey, LDF, I just talked to Patrick and Peyton, and they said it's okay if I also kind of help you just get it off the ground.
I appreciate that.
Yeah.
We want to do everything by the rule, but yeah, I'll always welcome and encourage support.
Cool.
Oh yeah, that's a good question. Are we registering participation anywhere for this call?
I think we've got that covered. I think, Pablo, are you on top of that? I think between them, Retro and Pablo will have it sorted. Yeah, there we go.
Okay, great. Awesome. Want to make sure we're giving credit where credit is due. Appreciate everyone's time. All right. I think we can probably go ahead and get started. Thank you everyone for coming, and it's so nice to meet all of you. I'm sorry that you're stuck with me for the time being. I am kind of speaking on behalf of the Joke Council, which was kind of the instantiator of the Composable CVC. Just to give a little bit of background on how we kind of got here. So JokeDAO.io is a governance platform that came about actually based on kind of a governance experiment that started over a year and a half ago on Twitter, which was, in our opinion, kind of like a way that a joke to reality pipeline kind of showcased the power of governance at kind of the lowest stakes by having kind of a weekly competition where individuals could submit and then people who engaged with the contest could vote on the winning joke at the time. And that's been kind of like a running governance experiment that has spiraled into what is now a full-fledged DAO with a token and an NFT community, and now kind of as I mentioned, a platform that has now been fully funded. So we kind of are a group of governance enthusiasts who have been running experiments and who, as a bunch of members, basically just participate in a bunch of different communities, but who are really more so focused than anything else on the implementation of governance structures. So while in our day jobs, we kind of focus on theories and practicalities of what governance will look like and the very serious concerns, obviously, that we're talking about here when it comes to governance for an organization such as Maker. But by starting with those first principles of how are we, automating, getting engagement for, bringing the community into, and in practice, implementing these governance structures, that's kind of the lens with which we come to this space. So as I mentioned, this is kind of the core of who started the Composable CVC, but that does not mean that membership and participation is limited to those who participate in this one very small governance example, but more so how all of us kind of came to the table with the interest in and mindset with which we approach kind of this end game experiment in and of itself. And so as we think about kind of composable CVC, what that means to us, and what's really important, I think, Kianga, you actually called this out really well in the forum post that we had a little bit of back and forth on in the very beginning, but with the, understanding in mind that the literal end game of this experiment is kind of a more efficient, fluid, information flow and governance experiment, along with, automation and AI and some of the technical tools that are going to help us get to a point of scale that incorporates hopefully all of, if not a large percentage of maker holders who don't have the time, resources, and bandwidth to really participate on, like a daily, weekly, monthly cadence. We really wanted to come in and help set up process and inform decisions in a way that would, lean towards that kind of end state. And so me as an individual really decided to go, or basically I'm doing the process of going from kind of like 0 to 100 and being here with all of you, which has been, it's a lot of information to come into. It's a little bit intimidating in some ways, shapes and forms, but everyone's been super helpful and participatory, and we're just really grateful for an opportunity to take, like we said, a lot of the theory and promise of what governance structures can be, knowing some of the challenges from firsthand experience, and bringing that, to this group who obviously has a lot of the same goals in mind in terms of governance as a structure. And so that kind of leads us to where we are right now here on this first CVC meeting, and I've spent some time listening to the other calls. Like I said, really just trying to get my bearings straight around just even some of the structures that got us to where we are today, some of the, tensions that we're trying to solve for. And so really just trying to keep an open mind in terms of keeping that learner's hat on and asking maybe what seem like dumb questions sometimes, hopefully that being helpful. But as I mentioned, I am one of, kind of a group of individuals who are going to be participating in both these calls and also the process along the way, and have been really grateful to have support from other people in the ecosystem who I think are drawn to this idea of really looking after kind of the efficiency, utilization of software, DAO-to-DAO partnerships, on-chain automation, some of the role delegation, and really just adding another kind of vector of experimentation into the many decisions, not only that need to be addressed right now, but like obviously to come over the next year, 2 years, 3 years, and beyond. So yeah, that's just a little bit of background on like how we got here, knowing that we, and I myself am new to kind of this group and I'm meeting a lot of you for the first time, and why we decided to participate. And so yeah, that's me. I'm LDF. Again, speaking on behalf of what is now the Composable CVC, but that the Joke Council as a group of NFT holders that kind of govern the Joke ecosystem really came to decide to do this as an experiment. So very grateful to be here with all of you. Please challenge me or like push back on any of my like misunderstandings as I am getting up to speed here. But yeah, hopefully maybe at least one of the silly questions will end up spurring some good conversation. So I know we're a little bit behind in terms of a lot of the CVCs had their first meeting last week. And so I want to make sure that I'm not, the only one talking this entire time. And I know we do have some specific scope to focus on for the stability and liquidity framework. So I know we will get there. But yeah, just wanted to make sure that I'm up to speed on everything and that anyone has a chance to correct me if any of my understanding up until this point has been incorrect. Cool. No?
I think you're doing great. This is fantastic.
Thank you. Okay, cool. Well, then, like I said, we are at the Composable CVC. We are all about efficiency. And so if I can spare you from listening to me ramble on for more time than we need to, then great. But in the interest of time, I think one of the other pieces of how we want to operationalize not only these meetings, but just how we are formalizing decisions for this group is kind of this heavy emphasis on process, on trying out different, governance frameworks using software. And so obviously JokeDAO being kind of the one that inspired us in the first place, but among many that we are going to consider and play around with, and honestly welcome other CVCs to try out and for all of us to kind of learn through this with us. But our goal is to basically set up these weekly calls so that we can align on the following week's, agenda, and hopefully be able to, if needed, run a race in between now and the following week. So what that basically means is obviously having some kind of prompt coming out of this meeting in which all of us can kind of submit proposals to, and then delegates can vote on. And so maybe the following week we can kind of analyze the responses from those contests to just get a better gut check instead of kind of in a forum setting, like really what is top of mind for individuals. So we'll work out that process as we go along, but that's just one example of how we're thinking about bringing these decisions on chain a little bit more, allowing more people to kind of participate passively, either by looking at the results of them and then maybe coming to the meetings to dig into it more, and having a little bit more structure about surfacing ideas. So always welcome additional tools that we should consider, and making that process more streamlined. But just like I said, an example of how we're thinking about just bringing a little bit of rigor to, or ideas to how we make decisions as a group. Awesome. Any questions?
I think one question is how we will set up possible contributors to be able to vote on or participate and submit proposals in the job races. But I think we're going to figure out a claiming process that's going to work for everybody, and probably just use the Ethereum addresses that delegates have submitted in their registration to drop tokens there, so people can really participate in these polls without any friction.
Definitely. And on that note, this is kind of like a small point, but yeah, one of the things that would be really nice just to see even on a week by week basis is just even a breakdown of like who's in these meetings, not just like from an individual perspective, of course, but like I don't even know the breakdown looking at this set of squares, right? Like how many delegates are there? How many people are, facilitators, or what roles kind of make up this group? In addition, because obviously we can open it up beyond that in terms of submission criteria and voting, but would be a pretty interesting thing to kind of track week over week. I see some people typing.
I like that idea a lot. I'm curious if you do have anything that you kind of want from, it seems a few delegates have already kind of declared for your platform. So is there anything you're kind of looking for those members to do with engaging, like any expectations in terms of participating in joke races or anything like that?
I think ideally the expectations will be set somewhat on a week by week or topic basis, but that's why even just having a baseline of like who is the audience, that is continually showing up on calls, who's participating async. I think my bias is always towards tailoring the contest to kind of the question at hand, as opposed to trying to set a structure that's going to be the same every week without knowing how those conversations are going to evolve. And this might not be the right question for this group or this conversation, but one of the things I was thinking about as I was going through kind of the structure of, the different weekly, scope focuses, and the fact that there is kind of a lot of overlap between delegates and a lot of these CVCs, at least at this early stage, where a lot of the CVCs have kind of like one official member, and we're all kind of asking somewhat the same questions. Like it would be, I'm curious how much room for changes to the ongoing structure there are. Because not that this is like something I'm throwing out as a suggestion, but for example, I could see a world where, the scopes, if they don't have immediate changes that need to get made, and it really is on a quarterly basis that we're proposing, some of the position documents to be kind of like finalized. Maybe there is a world where the scopes themselves have members show up from all the CVCs and the CDs at the same time. So just curious, like how much room for interpretation there is with what we're engaging with, as opposed to I'm trying to follow the rules as they're written, but like, should I be raising those questions?
Is that for whom is that a question? Is that for the facilitators?
I don't even
Like,
know who the question is for. That's part of the problem, I guess.
yeah, so I think we could ask. So I think there's two ways we could ask people. Like one is we could ask the fine folks from GovAlpha for their input and like their current reading, and then we could ask delegates like more of a question of like surfacing what they know about being in the scopes that allows us or prohibits us from changing that.
Got it. Okay. Yeah, because like I said, I don't want to get anyone too bogged down in process, and obviously want to try my best to focus on, the most pressing things that we need to figure out as a group together. Obviously, having most of that work happen probably in the beginning async between these meetings, but just for efficiency's sake, like knowing the levers to pull is very helpful. And based on listening into the other CVC calls, it sounds like in the short term, kind of right now, the very immediate focuses are somewhat on kind of how advisors are somewhat appointed in order to answer some of these questions that maybe haven't come up yet, but will in the future. And then obviously some of the conversations around ALM, which I am not like the best person to talk about in specific detail, but just, yeah, like I said, trying to balance the decisions on process and how to make those more efficient with the actual decisions to be done, which are going to inform how a process can be more efficient.
Yeah, I think
So-
that's fantastic. And I mean, like regarding the ALM, like what comes to mind here, just being the composable CVC, what I could see is like, for instance, using something like JobDAO or a similar tool to just surface like the kind of priorities, and then asking delegates to submit like who should we even poll, like who are the relevant people to poll, like what the DAO should even do, and to come to a strategy, right? So I think we could basically do this turtles all the way down thing with composing.
I'm always a fan of that. And that's why I know we ran into a little bit of a kind of a reframing of what CVCs even kind of stand for, because our original thought was this idea of kind of, credible neutrality, the fact that the tools itself will decide at the end of the day based on, who our members even are, who is eligible to submit versus make these decisions, that we are going to abide by, right? If a submission gets all of the votes and we decided, anyone can submit a proposal, only delegates can vote on it. At the end of the day, whatever wins, whether I like it or not. So, yeah, I'm always in favor for kind of contests upon contests. So that might be a good first step and test where, like I said, it doesn't get theoretical on how do we set up the process. Okay, I see some comments in here. Okay, from what I've observed and read in the scope, CVCs have fairly broad flexibility in what they discuss. Right now, if Composable wants to do things more urgently, they can MIP 102 edits. Might be worth opening a thread on some of those governance friction points since it's been a struggle. And there's a bunch of people typing. Okay, so yeah, it sounds like maybe a contest might be the best first thing for us to discuss. This is also partially why I asked about, the weekly topics and whatnot, because obviously we want to get to conclusion. If we're using kind of these async models in between the meetings themselves, and then using the time for discussion, I can see a world where multiple scopes will get discussed, even in just reviewing some of those outcomes. So just, yeah. Trying to like respectfully follow the rules, but question them. Okay.
Yeah, I like the idea of MIP 102, but at the current moment, like what would the friction point be that we address for this CVC? And I don't know, like maybe that's a question for Pros and Patrick. What you've heard so far from the process that we envision, do you see any any like that we're meeting any kind of core alignment artifact limitations here, or is that all going to be hunky-dory?
So it is like kind of hard to rule on an action that hasn't been taken place for rules that haven't been solidified, right? So
Well, that's kind of why I'm
I'll
like,
try to
okay,
give you.
in that example, right? Like, let's say, okay, to your point, like, what are the governance friction points? Okay, we can like run a contest, and anyone can submit like friction points that they view as, you know, a problem, and then we can decide which ones are the most pressing based on that. That's where, like I said, I want to ideally get into the muscle of, if we have a question, like, we can run it through a system, even if it's in the short term, you know, like a poll on Discord and it's, you know, responses to that. Obviously, I'd like it to be on chain as much as possible, but that's kind of the reflex that I'm trying to get muscle memory for.
And like, you know, this sounds very aligned, right? Like the idea of like hosting discussions in public based on strategy, like, you know, like this sounds like something that should be experimented in, and we might bump into things, but like I would argue that kind of the part of the idea behind in-game is just like you're supposed to try things and see what breaks, right? Because worst case scenario, you spin up a new CVC with a new name and you can do it the exact same way. Like that's kind of like the friction is just like the starting process, which yes, it's annoying. But the idea is that we should be trying to iterate and trying to bump up against these rules and seeing what will be more efficient.
I like
So like
it too
from
because I think we can expand it beyond just us, right? That's why I kind of alluded to this in the beginning, but I see composable CVC's role, you know, as trying to experiment with some of these things, but not trying to limit it to just us, right? So we could allow more people to participate in these systems a little bit. Maybe you have to hold a tiny bit of maker to submit a proposal or to submit a pain point at all. Most people won't have anything to submit, but like the fact that they're able to participate in some way, I think is a positive.
I think Frank had a really or Art P2Poo Bob had a really good comment, and that's like ADs can't be political. So I think that's actually perfect, because we don't want people to chime in with their personal opinions, but we want people who have a lot of surface area with the current governance construct to just show up and say, okay, we're witnessing every CVC has this and this and this blocker or obstacle in their governance process, and this is exactly what we want to surface. So I think the requirement for aligned delegates to be as neutral as possible is actually playing exactly to our strength here, because we don't want that to be like a mudslinging contest about endgame gripes, right? But we want this to be a way to surface reliable information about where the pain points currently are.
Yeah, you know what's interesting about that is, in the sense of kind of like, again, like this contest model, what the submission part is facts, right? Like the voting is the part that gets political if you decide one pain point is more important than another. But I could see delegates actually, to your point, surface pain points that they're seeing across all of the CVCs, and then that information exists for each CVC to interpret differently, to vote on differently, and then to attack differently within their own meetings. Which I think is interesting, because in my head it almost flips. Or actually, no, that kind of isn't that the model? Like CVCs are supposed to interpret the same kind of information from CDs, just
Yes.
different. Muzzling of delegates is a great pain point to address if you need one. Okay, so yeah, exactly. So basically, wait, CDs are prohibited from speaking to each other? Okay.
So basically there's like a lot of restrictions placed on delegates, because the idea is like a delegate is just supposed to be an execution layer for the strategy. So while these concerns might exist and there might be like a good way to address them for delegates, and I'm not saying that's not valuable, I'm saying that like maybe it's less of the CVC's concern, because the CVC is looking for people to participate on strategy. At the very least, they need to communicate that to the delegates, but like, you know, it doesn't matter to them if it's coming from delegates or other CVC members, as long as pain points and issues are being serviced and they're being recommended fixed constitutionally. Like, it's kind of the delegates' role to figure out how they can support that process without breaking the Constitution. Like the CVC, you know, it should keep delegates in mind, but like also remember, you know, your job is to worry about the strategy. So
Right.
if you can achieve that and the delegates can't, like, I don't know, that's not necessarily your concern unless it's causing a system-wide issue.
Got it.
And I'd say like Frank pointed out, like I think delegates have to make sure that they do that in an aligned way, and an aligned way is that they do what they can to keep their personal opinion out of the surfacing process. And of course, there's selection bias that's unavoidable, but it's very different from writing muzzling delegates is causing communications issues, and muzzling delegates is the dumbest thing ever. We need to get rid of it, right? So I think that's why this kind of neutrality mandate comes in.
Yeah, I guess on a like related point, because I think it's hard. You can change like any one of these words or, you know, people who are doing it, and obviously it has different outcomes. I guess where I'm asking about this is in terms of like the role of some of these experiments that we're running and insights that we're trying to surface, again, with the goal of making decisions in line with the principles that we outline as composable CVC. But like, I guess some of the things I'm raising are a little bit more about how CVCs as a concept can be more efficient, or like how there's a decent amount of overlap, it seems like, at least in this early stage. And so I'm curious, like, is that within our scope? I guess it is, to help individual members of the CVCs not have to do quite as much work and but it sits outside of making the decision, I guess, right? Like, there's contests we can run to say, what do our members actually believe the final position document language should be? But then there's some of this process work that might apply to not just us. But again, I see a lot of overlap, even in just like people attending these meetings and the group that's participating right now. So I guess it's just up to us as the composable CVC to say, hey, we're going to move forward with this. If other CVCs want to participate, they can, but we're providing this as like something to react to. Okay, cool. Then I think we should do that. I think that's kind of what this group wants to do, is push that narrative forward, that it's better to use these composable tools. I mean, literally, it's like CVC composition.
I mean, does anyone who's like, there's been a lot of people present at other meetings, does anyone want to talk about like some of the issues that have surfaced there, maybe as like potential examples that could be given a go using this model, right? Like, I feel like several CVCs have talked about kind of the same things for the past week, and maybe there's a few collective issues there that might be good candidates for trying to address some solutions.
I guess again, though, on that note, like, if no one wants to have specific examples right now, I guess I'm just asking, like, stepping outside of being a CVC member that has like one job, right? And I know that some other meetings talked about, you know, the incentive structure and the fact that this is somewhat set up so that CVC members don't necessarily spend, you know, hours and hours and hours of time and need to have all of the details. But let's say we as a group pose a contest. We say surface, you know, feedback on pain points within CVCs. there's a bunch of pain points surfaced, we pick a couple of them, like, do we almost convene a council of CVC members across CVCs to like implement those changes? Or are we just, I guess, like, how much effort should we be putting into fixing these problems, I guess?
So, hey, I'm from 3F delegate. So, I think as a CVC, and this is just a suggestion, right? Because you can do as you please. This is your world. I'm just living in it. So what needs to, from what I understand, what should be focused on is the 12 scopes, which should be merged down to 5 scopes. So within a quarter, 3 months, you have to come up with a position document, which is the scope framework's position document that has to be delivered at the end of the quarter. And in that document, you need to provide some of the changes that you want to be made to some of these scopes, right? So as an example, right now, through the first 2 weeks, we've kind of focused more on MIP 103, which is the liquidity and stability framework of DAI, right? Keeping it liquid and also stable. The MIP 104, which is the decentralized collateral scope. And the MIP 105, which is the real world assets collateral, which goes back to asset liquidity management, which, by the way, nobody in this community is an expert on, so no worries there. We're all just learning. So from what I've seen so far for the past 2 weeks, most of the CVCs or AVCs, as they're going to be called in the near future, they've been focusing on trying to get someone, which is an advisory council member, who can be a strategist or a member or some kind of advisor that can provide ALM advisory services for the 3 scopes against liquidity and stability, decentralized collateral, and RWA. There's a budget for that in MIP 104. I think it's section 3.3, blah, 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 blah. You'll see it there, and it's about 249,000 DAI per quarter available. So it's about 83,000 DAI per month. So I also represent, or I'm joining, I guess, suggesting to the KISS CVC. And right now we have a task to come up with some kind of edit for, I believe it would be MIP 104 section 1, which pretty much, if I remember correctly, explains how you can hire an ALM expert, since we need one, right? Or an advisory council member, sorry, which could be an ALM expert that's going to show up to these meetings, is going to get paid for doing that, and is going to drop a report here at this meeting saying that, you know, this kind of asset liability or VAR needs to be this, the parameters, et cetera, et cetera. So yeah, I think from my point of view, I kind of wanted to ask you a question since I did join your AVC. How familiar are you with the Maker Constitution, and how familiar are you with the 12 scopes, although they are going to be merged into 5 scopes?
Yes. Also, thank you, because as I mentioned, like, it's always a trap, at least in my head, of taking, you know, the 5 scopes, the 12 scopes, and like abstracting them away to the processes that get us to, you know, the proposed changes for each individual one. And like, that's the balance I'm always trying to strike. But it actually also kind of plays into the question that I keep asking, right? Which is like, okay, so let's say KISS CVC is proposing changes to how an advisory council member can be, you know, chosen. If that gets passed, like, that would apply to all CVCs, right? So there's almost like the 2 parts still, which is one is the process and one is the actual execution of whose decision kind of gets made, which is, in my, like, from what I understand, that's the role of the CVCs, right? It's how does how does the actual advisor get chosen? Although, are you saying that this is specific per CVC? So like, you guys would follow your own rules that you proposed to make a decision on an advisor that comes only to your meetings? Like, is there a world where we end up competing for the same advisor to come to 2 different meetings about the same topic?
Yeah, so from what I understand, it is that if, as an example, KISS CVC is asking the same thing you're asking for, right? They want us to help write an edit to MIP 104 with regards to hiring an ALM expert. I don't have clarity on how that would work. I would imagine that as a, and this is speaking for myself, and others can speak if they have a different idea or if they know the answer, but I would probably write the same edit for both CVCs, and then under your guidance, you would tell me, no, this is trash. We're not voting for this. And I'll be like, okay. And then, you know, Mio might be like, for KISS CVC, this is the guy who runs it. He would be like, yes, go out there and vote for that. So now I have two smart contracts, delegate contracts that allow me to vote for both. And I would imagine, and anybody in Gov Alpha can correct me, I would vote yes for KISS CVC and no for Composable CVC because you instructed me not to. So, and then depending on the rest of the CVCs, if they agree with it, if you know Refi CVC supports it or doesn't support it, and that would either pass or not. But you know, I'm just taking again, as I wrote on the chat, we're just pass-throughs, and I'm kind of trying to pass unbiased information to all the CVCs that I represent, even perhaps CVCs that I go and you know make an appearance on. So that's what we are. We're just pass-throughs and kind of like helpers of delivering, you know, how to build this because it's pretty new, right? It's only 2 weeks old, but yeah, it'd be interesting to hear what others think because maybe I got it completely wrong, and I would like to get it right, obviously.
No, I think you crushed it, Frank, at least as far as I know, but happy to be corrected here. But I think, like, again, like this neutral role of the delegates comes in very handy here because, for instance, let's say Composable CVC is now very interested in the opinion of the expert that presented to KISS CVC. Of course, we could have him present again, but what we could also do is just ask delegates who joined this call or are members of us and are members of KISS to just say, hey, what did the guy say? Just, you know, give me the lowdown, like give me the TLDR. I just want to know, and then ask specific questions. So then the delegates would be able to talk about that because it's just neutrally relaying that information. And we would get the benefit of the information without having to invite the same guy again or the same girl again.
Right. And in that, on that note, and I had a note written down for myself, even just asking, obviously there's some intentional tension, you know, struck between some of these different roles on purpose. But it sounds like there's a lot more rules about delegates talking to each other as opposed to CVC members talking to each other. And like I said, obviously at this early stage, there's a decent amount of overlap. And so I don't want to add more work for everyone by trying to like come up with basically duplicate proposals to try and make them seem a little bit different, to seem like we're doing more work, if that makes sense. So that's kind of the, again, like the tension that I'm trying to weigh. Okay, Kianga, I'm moderator for the Refi CVC, and a big challenge is balancing giving informed input on the business of maker and die, and also having a focus on softer issues like what you're talking about and regeneration in our case. Yeah, it's it's definitely another piece of tension. And like I said, I just want to ask in case there are specific rules that I need to follow, as opposed to where there could be more room for efficiencies if that's not the case. So again, so focusing on like the specific focus, right? Like stability and liquidity framework, like merging the scopes, and literally how do we select an advisor? How does that process get done through the lens of we literally need to hire an ALM expert because I am not that person. Like as in a real world example, I think someone put that in here, right? Where it's obviously a lot easier to develop the framework around the decision to be made as opposed to frameworks for framework's sake. So can I suggest we come up with 2 or 3 prompts till next meeting? Yes, definitely.
I mean, I think we have one prompt right from the beginning, which I think was surfacing governance friction points. I think that's super important and fits perfectly with the mandate of this CVC.
Yep.
And regarding ALM and experts, I think maybe, I don't know, we could come up with something there. We could also wait till we have some more input by an expert here.
I guess that's where my question is. So it sounds like KISS CVC is already drafting a way or an amendment to how we appoint advisors. Like, is that something that CVC should be working on together at all?
I don't believe so. I think it's. Oh, sorry. Go ahead. You probably have the answer there.
No, I don't have the answers, just thoughts, right? And it's definitely something you can collaborate with, but it's kind of like your kingdom, right? You know, if you want to say, well, someone else is already looking on this, so we can probably make more impact looking elsewhere. Like I would argue that's like kind of your call to make. The scopes are supposed to provide like, you know, an anchor point for the weekly meetings, because you know you have this quarterly task. Like by the end of the quarter, you have to come up with answers to all these things. But in terms of how you want to navigate that responsibility, like it's kind of up to you and your members. So right now
Well,
you don't have.
I was
Yeah.
going to say, like, not speaking on behalf of everyone, but just throwing out again, in the interest of what we have said that this CVC is about, it is about composability and efficiency and collaboration. And so, yeah, I think to the extent that where there is process that could benefit from, you know, combined resources and not duplicating efforts, that's where my bias tends to go. And then that frees us up to have more opinionated thoughts about the implementation of those. So again, like whether that's us surfacing governance friction from everyone and then taking that data on the next meeting and saying, okay, as a group and as our members, which of these are the most important for us to address or to put our focus on, and let other CVCs make their own decisions accordingly. And then, hey, by the way, since we've done this in kind of an open and transparent way, individuals can make their own decisions about, hey, if we all agreed every CVC has the same exact pain point, maybe we all work on that together to make all of our lives easier, so that we can free up the time for the CVCs to focus on what matters the most to them individually, which is, I think that was the one criticism of the original submission we had for this CVC, which was like, again, credible neutrality, which is supposed to be the point of the system itself, so that the CVCs have opinions. So when you know that you're delegating votes to this framework of decision making, you know what that means, right? Refi CVC is, I think, a great example of that. And so that you know it's like more values based as opposed to figuring out how the process gets done at the same time that the decisions are being made.
And here, what we could do is when we have, because I think like you said, like both of our expertise is not in ALM, but in other things. So I think if that's like, it seems to be pretty open what we can talk about. So like, if we say we're gonna look at what growth and KISS are proposing for ALM and stability and liquidity. And then we're going to take that back to Joe Council, who is basically running this CVC, and ask the members there for input, and then come back to CDs to align delegates to address that input in the best way possible, right? So then I think we have a good process that basically just uses our group and the knowledge that is there, or the Joe Council group on the one hand, but they don't have to participate in every meeting. And then at the same time, we focus on furthering the process that we have deep knowledge about and contribute in that way.
Yeah, exactly. And I think, again, I think this is part of just being at the earliest stages of it, is that we're even like one step before that, right? Which is, again, some of these proposals of, oh, wait, maybe you need one more step to anchor the prompt, which is how do the governance friction matter or impact what we need to see for DAI to operate well? An example might be how governance reacted well or badly to manage the run on DAI risk proposed by USDC PEG. This way your work is specific to something that can improve Maker and has a location in a particular scope you can target for the output of the surfacing. Absolutely. I think, again, just getting in the habit of this being a muscle that gets repeated and iterated on based on the decision at hand and not like overly focusing on like the process for process sake is what I would like to have like a bias towards, because otherwise you can just kind of spin in circles and iterate forever and nothing ever gets decided. So yeah, I think that's great. I am definitely going to write that down in terms of making prompts more specific and setting up, I think, subsequent prompts to slot in and out, again, the examples and the decision at hand, but like really refining the process through that. And then I think there is also this, there's like the proposals themselves for, again, things like actually hiring an advisor, for example. And that's where maybe we will see a bit more collaboration among the CVCs as we're all making our decisions separately. Well, sorry, I'm just also taking notes at the same time. In terms of what needs to get done, like we have obviously a meeting next week. I'm aware of the fact that we have 13 minutes left. Like, what do we need to decide on by next week?
I think what we want delegates to do, or like where we need their input most, is I think a very valuable decision, because that way we have some continuity going on till the next week and keep momentum going.
Yeah, I'm trying to reach out to like mid-size ALM advisory consulting firms, and just having a hard time. One of the ideas was that maybe to bring them on to make a presentation to sell the community, right? Because it's such a nice budget that's being voted on right now, in my opinion. This is just an opinion, a suggestion to you. It's $249,000 per quarter, which is $83,000. We believe that $83,000 a month is sufficient. Not that it needs to be spent, the $83,000, like every single Conti and DAI, but it's enough to get a good firm. There's been talks about Ernst & Young and others that are top tier firms that can do ALM consulting for the DAO on a project basis. So I've been trying to reach out, but even this morning I got one that pretty much, as soon as you tell them that it's a crypto related protocol, they're just like, it's just not in our business. Like they're just not interested. Like you get like a one sentence rejection, right? Which is fine. But the idea, so what I'm trying to say is the idea was to maybe bring somebody in one of these calls and maybe give like a 20-minute presentation, a consulting firm to kind of sell the community and the CVC on how they can provide those services with that kind of budget that's already looking to be allocated after the MIP 102 sub-proposal vote that's currently up right now. So, but yeah, it's hard. And then some of them obviously want you to give them like, your pretty much a social security number as an American, but so, which we're not trying to do here, right? So it's hard for them. So, even using a fictitious name doesn't help either. So, but then again, there's a lot of firms out there in the Midwest that aren't that, you can tell they're not that good. Who knows? Maybe they're a two-man operation team. So it's kind of hard. I'm interested to see if anybody will show up in one of these calls, maybe next week or the following week, from one of the large firms to kind of sell the DAO, or if anyone here is working on something. I know in the past, like Paper, I know you've worked on this already, and maybe a few others. But yeah, for 3F, we've just been having a lot of hard time. And again, we're just reaching out to the smaller firms as opposed to going for the top guns. But no luck, but that's an idea that could be incorporated in the near future. You know, this is just for the ALM portion, but maybe in the future, it could be something where we're looking to change MIP 108, I believe it is. As an example, by the way, MIP 108, the growth scope for growth. And maybe, you know, there's an idea here where you want a certain kind of marketing to be done. And maybe we need to bring a marketing expert on here to kind of give us a 20-minute talk. So those are the things that we can help. By next week, you know, you still got like, 2 months for the quarter to end, I think. So the position document doesn't have to be delivered in the next few weeks. So we do have some time there. But if, you know, any of the ADs that are here that belong to this CVC want to kind of do some edits for MIP 103, 104, 105, yeah, that'd be cool too, as a suggestion. But yeah.
Awesome. On that note, and thank you, Open Sky, for summarizing the prompts. I think that we're going to focus on, at least specifically for the next week. But the second one, like, it brings me back to kind of one of the original questions that I posed, which is, I know that we've structured this so that there's a specific scope kind of every week that's the focus. But in terms of the process, it sounds like we're going to need to kind of go through similar phases, right? Of not necessarily treating them all as equal weight in terms of needing to pull in additional resources. And so I'm curious how we can think about, or like if it makes sense to start thinking ahead at, let's say, you know, we feel very confident that we're going to need to pull in marketing support for growth, right? Like that's maybe a couple of weeks out, but how are we batching together just the decisions that are repeated based on each scope, as opposed to waiting until that theme comes up to then address the same things?
A very good point to like challenge, right? Because essentially, like these problems will be occurring kind of constantly.
Right.
Yeah, I don't know.
Is it, well, I guess this is where, like, I asked the question earlier in terms of what is open for change and what's not, because I could see a world where, again, as Composable CVC, we could almost stack rank the different scopes about which one is most urgent to start working on first. You know, we could also stack rank them based on which ones we think we need to pull in the most outside support for because we don't have internal expertise. And that's, to me, like a little bit more about how I see the CVCs differentiating themselves in terms of a strategy, as opposed to trying to figure out all of this process based on, like I said, the schedule of events. Because it might be very different, and we might see, you know, growth focus on growth, for example. And so maybe we as Composable don't feel like we need to put quite as much effort and energy into solving that first, and might be able to glean some learnings from other CVCs and whatnot based on kind of each of us allocating our resources and time differently. But I don't know if that's like against the rules, I guess.
So Code Knight here. So it's pretty broad in what you discuss. You're not limited to just discussing what's in the scope week. So, I mean, it could be you dedicate like 10 minutes or something to the scope focus of the week, and then you can spend the rest of your time on whatever specific issues are, you know, most in your wheelhouse or most interesting to you.
Okay, cool. I almost then feel like that would be a great thing for delegates to basically almost give, like, if we have a scope focus for the week, or even if we ran through all of them, right? Like, what's the top thing we need to know this week about what's happened or what's going on in other CVCs, like almost more of a pulse check so that we can restructure our time and energy on what we're focusing on for the rest of the discussion might be good. And that way, to your point, Kianga, that way we still fulfill that requirement of having a conversation about it, but it just doesn't accidentally take up the entire hour when we could have spent more time focusing on something else.
So like, again, this is your show, but like one way to maybe do that is to ask, you do have a few delegates here who've kind of like pledged to support the CVC. You could ask them to take a look at the Constitution and drop what they think the interpretation should be and why. Because basically you're going to be hitting against a whole number of things, right? Which makes answering live relatively difficult. But delegates shouldn't have to expose any bias to say, well, it's written in this it's written in this article XYZ, it's written in this article XYZ.
Right. So I do you think it'd be fair to say that the actionable question then would be, what is the minimum requirement for a meeting to ensure that we're satisfying the weekly scope requirements? And then knowing that there's flexibility outside of those minimum requirements to structure these meetings the way that we see fit.
Yeah. So on that front, there isn't a minimum. If you read the MIP, it just says, the first 12 weeks in each quarter are designated as the scope focus week for a different scope. That's all the guidance. So I feel like it gives you fairly broad latitude as long as you discuss it to some extent.
Okay. Cool. Well, then I think I don't want to speak on behalf of everyone, but I feel like a good structure for these meetings then would be for every week to run through at the very beginning. Honestly, I think running through the 5 once it's been condensed, if that's easier, like just run through the 5 scopes, hit on any top, like things to note for that week specifically. That way we do cover whichever the focus week is. Maybe we give a couple more minutes to that focus, especially knowing that other CVCs might be talking more about that in that week. And then kind of leave room with the rest of the time to focus on what we've deemed highest priority. And we can do that through running these contests. So we could even put out after this meeting, of the 12 scopes, of the 5 scopes, once it's been shrunk down, which one do you think is highest priority for composable CVC next week? And we can vote on it that way. We can iterate with a couple of different ways of doing that. But I think if we focus on that, then, like I said, we can keep a pulse on what's going on with all of them, but use our very limited time together to get into what we need to. Cool. So then in terms of, I know we only have 2 minutes. So coming out of this, I know we took a capture of who all was here, but getting a snapshot of who all was here, what their roles exactly are, would be super helpful, just as I think about async, like structuring a contest specifically for next week, so that hopefully next week can run a little bit smoother than this week and we can improve every week. But I really appreciate everyone's time, and we're all learning together. Awesome. Well,
just
thank
want to say
you.
this was really inspiring. Yeah, thank you for hosting. This was really cool.
I appreciate it. Well, I guess I'll see you in the metaverse and then see you next Friday. All right. Bye, everyone.